Hello, everybody. Michael Kummer here with Xiting. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar. Today's webinar is going to be the succession, basically, of the webinar we had a week or two ago. So the last webinar was about best practice SAP role design, just in general, without any specific tools or solutions. Today, we'll follow up on that and show you how you can implement and execute on the strategy we discussed last week using the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS. Jeff Porter, our Senior SAP Security Consultant, is going to walk you through today's webinar, so I'll hand over here in a bit. Before we start, a couple of housekeeping items I want to let you know about. There is a questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to just type in those questions. If Eric and myself will try to keep an eye on those questions. We have a relatively packed agenda for today. Jeff decided to put like 50 slides into our presentation. So we may be getting short on time. If so, we'll follow up offline with answers to your questions. I know we still owe you answers to the questions from the previous webinar, so we'll send them out together so we have a complete picture of all the questions and concerns and respective answers. We're also going to record this session, so within 24 hours you'll receive an email either from me or from GoToWebinar directly with a link to the recording, so feel free to replay it if you like, or share the link with your coworkers. And with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff, and he'll walk you through the webinar today.
Hey everybody, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. So as Michael said, we have quite a packed slide deck to get through today, so I won't waste any time and we'll get moving. Just a quick blurb about who we are. We were founded in 2008 by security experts from SAP. We're headquartered in Switzerland. We're about 60 employees now with offices in Germany, Switzerland, England, Romania, and the US. Most of the senior consultants are SAP trainers as well. We do SAP training for SAP education. So you'll see us there on occasion doing those. We're going to start off with fundamentals of the SAP authorization management, just a kind of a recap of what we talked about last time. We'll talk about the best practice approach. All of these slides now are going to be geared towards how the XAMS software does the best practice approach to role redesigns. Then we'll actually talk about the XAMS modules a little bit, and at the end we'll have a summary and some Q&A if we have time. So the first thing we need to talk about, just kind of again a rehash, is the profile generator. That's kind of the main area where all the role redesign happens, and that SU24 is the backbone to that. A good role design of any kind, whether you use composite roles or task-based roles or single roles, which is the best practice, really needs to start with a good, strong SU24. And it's not something that you do one time and you're done with it. Your SU24 updates are a continual manual process. You're always going to be monitoring the SU24s, and you should always be updating them as your system changes and grows. All right, that's really the key point from last time. It's SU24, and you'll see that a lot of our tools all focus on helping you update and keep those SU24 values where they're supposed to be. So a typical project for XAMS starts with the role design, of course, where you're going to use usage data, actual usage data out of production. What have your users been doing? We're going to pull that data back into our system in development, and that's where we're going to focus our design work. The reason we do that is for a couple of reasons. The main one is SAP is a very big system. It has a lot of transactions, a lot of objects, and it's only getting more complicated now with Fiori and some of the other technologies that are coming forward. So you really want to be able to focus your efforts on what your users have been doing. And we have some tools, which we'll see in a little bit, that'll help you do that. After we get our role design virtually created, we meet with our business and we get them to approve the virtual design of the roles. We're going to push them to the profile generator, and then we're going to test them. Our testing typically happens in production. It's a product that we call production test simulation. And it's really just that, it's a simulation. And we'll talk about how exactly that works, but we're going to basically use a reference user, and we're going to simulate what would happen if we were to apply the roles to our production users in a go live situation. And we'll do some logging behind the scenes, and I'll explain to you how that actually works. This is the area where you are going to get the biggest bang for your buck in time and money. The reason being is that this is the place where your end users would typically have to come into a QA system and spend time doing testing, and you would spend time doing remediation on any errors they found in that iterative cycle that you go through. With the productive test simulation, we don't really want the user to even know that they're testing or that we're having the simulation going on. We want them to do their day-to-day work normally, and we're going to simulate their authorization checks behind the scenes. And then once we're confident that our roles are good, we're going to move to the protected go live. This is essentially the same thing as PTS, only now what we're going to do is if the users run into an authorization issue during our go live, they can request their old roles back on their own. They don't need to call a help desk. They don't need to call the security team and say, hey, I've got an authorization error. They can request their old roles back on their own. And when they do that, a reference user gets added to their ID with their access. And all of a sudden our logging turns on again. So now in the background, what's going to happen is they get to continue working, and we get a log that says exactly what it is that they were missing from their new roles. And we can go back and evaluate that and update the new roles as needed to get them back on track. Okay, and it comes with complete audit logging as well. So a typical project for XAMS is what this screen is presenting. You have your administration phase, right? So it's the project control management, who are your stakeholders, those kind of folks. We're going to install the XAMS software at that point and do all the customizing up front. Then we're going to go into the preparation phase. This is the first place where we're going to start taking a swipe at your SU24 values and try and get those optimized. We're going to optimize the SAP security configuration. So we're going to look at your system parameters, those kind of things, and ensure they're where they need to be. And then we're going to go through and we're going to look at SU25. If this is an upgrade situation, we'll help you with the post-processing if needed. If not, we'll skip that phase and we'll just go to the SU24 optimization parts. After that, after we get our first initial SU24 stuff done, we're going to now go into the design phase. We're going to go out to production. We're going to download some production data that our users have been using, anyway, our users that are in scope. And we're going to start evaluating job descriptions. So we'll use PPOME maybe to get some IDs of jobs. We'll start looking at if there's some security settings on the users themselves, user groups, functions, departments, those kind of areas, anything to give us an idea of what the job scopes should look like or the job name should look like. Then we'll model the concept based on job functions. So we'll see that in the role designer. And then after we get the initial design done, we're going to sit down and we're going to have some interaction with the business. This is going to be far less interactive than you're probably used to with the standard SAP implementation. If you've done role redesigns before, you'll be very familiar with sitting in a room for 2 or 3 days with spreadsheets and post-it notes and talking to the business and trying to figure out what their roles should look like. We're going to take most of that step out. We're going to have basically all of that data when we pull it down from production. And we'll be able to do most of that modeling up front. And really the only time we need to sit down with the business is right before we push these roles to Profile Generator. Okay, and then we're going to have the implementation phase. So we're going to create template roles. So if we have a derived role concept or if we need to apply multiple organizational values to these roles, we're going to go through and do that at this point. We'll do some quality checks. We're going to look for GDPR, SOD, those kind of things. We'll optimize and replicate the roles based off of template roles, and we'll see our version of derived roles and some of the benefits of that here in a little bit. And then we'll implement any scenarios for CO access. So if you have any of that kind of stuff we need to deal with, we'll do it at this point as well. At that point, we're going to go to validation, and this is where we're going to start activating the PTS, and we're going to do our PTS testing. You can expect PTS to last 4 to 6 weeks, although the bulk of your work will be done in the first 3 weeks. Within the first 3 weeks, you'll have most of the values identified that were missing from your role design early on. Again, here we're going to also approach SU24 optimizations at this point. Again, we're always focusing on getting the SU24 values optimized as best we can. The better we can optimize our SU24, the better your maintenance schedule will be later on in life, especially if you're planning an SU24 or you're planning an S4 HANA migration. I can't stress enough how important it is that your SU24 values be optimized as best you can prior to that, especially if you're going to use our tool to help you with the conversion of that. And we'll see a little bit of that here in a while. We have a tool that will help you do that optimization and that conversion for your roles, but it's going to be heavily reliant on your SU24 values. All right, so activation. Once we validate our roles, we're going to activate the protected go live, and we're going to assign the new roles to the users, and then we're going to do support during the go live. Your support during the go live, again, is going to be very different than probably what you're used to. A lot of companies will have big war rooms where the entire support teams are in these rooms 24 hours a day. There's people on call, and you're just waiting for tickets to come in or phone calls to come in with issues. With our system, you don't necessarily have to do that. Again, we're going to give the ability for the users to get their old roles back if they run into an error with our new design, and all of that logging will happen in the background, and we'll know exactly what it is that's missing. So they can continue to work uninterrupted, and we can still do and get the information that we need for our remediation later on. Okay. Then at the end, there's documentation. A project wouldn't be a project if we didn't have documentation to go along with it. This is where we're going to generate your SAP security concept. Most companies have a security concept or several parts of a security concept in multiple locations, right? So you'll have your naming standards, your programming standards, those kind of things. We provide a module called the Security Architect, which will help do all of that. We have templates for that. We'll see a little bit of that here in a while towards the end of the demonstration. And those values we can test, right? So one of the things your auditors are always complaining about is, do you test your security concept? How do we know that your SAP delivered IDs are locked down the way they're supposed to? How do I know there's no developer keys in production? So everything that you state you're going to do in your security concept, the hard part of that is testing it on a regular basis to stay in compliance or to prepare for audits. We have a tool that'll help you do that and test it in the background on a scheduled basis, so you don't have to do that. It'll generate a report and it'll show you the results, and we can hand that to the auditors. We can even send it to the auditors anonymously, so you can use their famous word, which is an automated check, an automated control. Right, an automatic control where we can't influence the results, they can get the report automatically, and we'll show you that later on. All right, so the Xams tool is made up of several modules. The Xiting Role Designer, that's where we're actually going to pull our data in and do our design work, our virtual design work. We have the ABAP Alchemist. It's a code scanner, but unlike most code scanners available, our code scanner has a slant towards the security side. In other words, it's going to look at your system from a security perspective, and it's going to look for things like missing security checks. So if there is table access, for instance, update table access to some table, some business table, and the coders, your programmers haven't coded an authority check around that, we're going to flag that for you, and we'll show you what it should be. We're also going to look in at any security authority checks that are in there and make sure they're coded correctly. So our Alchemist has kind of a slant to it that most code scanners do not. We have the Xiting Role Builder. This one works in conjunction with the Xiting Times module. They're both kind of required for setting up your productive test simulation and your protected go live. Think of the Xiting Role Builder as the analysis engine for the Xiting Times, whereas Xiting Times is the administrator console for setting up your tests and setting up the emergency access for users at a go live. All right, we have the Xiting Role Replicator. This is a bunch of mass tools that you probably have written already in your system. We've done the same thing. So we have tools for mass creation of roles, mass changing of users, mass creation of users, SUPC. What makes the replicator different than most of those kind of tools is that we also provide our version of derived roles there. It's called Role Replication, and we'll show that here in a little while. It's really a very neat tool. I think you'll find it pretty interesting. We have the Xiting Role Profiler. The role profiler is now where we're talking about our stay clean phase. At this point, when we're running the role profiler, we want to keep our security that we just spent all this time building clean and neat, and not get the scope creep that we've had in the past. We don't want any of the bad habits to creep into our roles. So things like manual inserted objects, values where we have a star in the fields for those things. We have big wide open ranges. Those kind of things we'll look at in the role profiler. We also have the ability, depending on how your system is implemented, we have the ability to tie the role profiler reports into your transport system. So when someone releases a task or someone releases a transport that has a role in it, we can run certain reports against that and flag those as having errors in them before you release the transport. I can even stop the release of the transport until all those errors are fixed. So I have the ability to stop the bad stuff from creeping into your roles and getting moved forward before that even happens with the role profiler. Security Architect is the second module. We just talked about it. It's where we do the security concept and compare it against your current settings for your pre-audit, those kind of things. That's the second part of what we call the stay clean phase. We also have a few free tools that we'll give you for free. We have a mass user locking tool, which is really good. Just from not saying because I work for the company, it actually is very, very good. You would really like it if you go take a look at it. It's on our website. You can go get a good look at it. We also have an Xiting RFC stock take tool, which is a good tool for getting an idea of what your RFC environment looks like. All right, so your type 3 RFC connections, how many do you have out there? How many are hard-coded with user IDs? How many have SAP all, SAP new kind of access on them? That tool is free of charge. It'll go out and give you a good idea of what that looks like. All right, so the first step is to get our information in from our production system. It's in the Xiting Role Designer. We're going to do virtual role designs, and we're going to build roles, as I've stated, on usage data from production. We're going to be able to analyze those roles before we actually push them into the profile generator. So we're going to be able to do some really good stuff, like, is this role going to have any SOD issues? Does it contain critical authorizations? The role designer can be tied to and use our what we call our CRA, or critical authorization framework, or we can tie to GRC. If you're using GRC, we can tie to GRC, and we can use that to help do analysis. Some of the new things that we can do with it is we can now start analyzing what the impact to your SAP licensing is going to be. I mentioned in the previous webinar that SAP has changed their licensing model. It's no longer based on what a user does in the system, it's based on what they're authorized to do. Okay, so it's looking at the actual authorizations in the roles that are assigned to the user and evaluating those and deciding what license that user should be charged for. We have the ability now, before we even go to Profile Generator, to look at that. What is this role going to actually fall? Where is it going to fall in our licensing scheme? And do we want that role to fall in that licensing scheme? So you can play all that virtual analysis stuff up front. When we do that in the virtual role design, we're going to be leveraging your SU24 values, okay, because these aren't actual roles. We don't have any actual authorizations there yet. We have to use SU24 for that initial swipe at your licensing impact. We can do this again a little bit later. We'll talk about it when we do it in the role designer or the role profiler, and that's when we actually look at the actual roles. All right, so some of the challenges is that typical role design projects tend to over-authorize or under-authorize roles way too much. There's no way to apply functional templates. We provide functional templates with the software, so if you have no idea what your basis role should look like, we can apply a functional template to get you started. We also have something, it's not documented here, but we have something called clustering now, which is machine logic. The machine logic can actually use, it's an algorithm that we can actually use, and based on the usage data and the usage history statistics, the machine, the actual software, can propose what your roles should look like. They can tell you up front, based on this algorithm, what the role cluster should look like. Okay. We can forecast, and this is what I was just talking, we can forecast the effects of the role concept on your transaction changes. So on the fly, we can add and remove things in and out of these roles and then do critical authorization checks, GDPR access checks. What's the calculation going to be for your user license if I add this transaction or if I take it away? I can now calculate all of that on the fly before I commit to pushing something to the profile generator. All right, so when you actually go into, and we've pulled down data into our development system, we've pulled actual usage data, you're going to get a screen that looks kind of like this. You'll see that on this one, we have the users on the left. We work from left to right. There's 3 panes. The left side is where we have our usage data, and we can group this usage data based on multiple ways. I can do it by component. I can do it, as you see now, by the who actually used the transactions. I can do it by functional area, some metadata type stuff as well. Okay. Creating virtual roles is super easy in our system. For instance, if we want to create a role for Michael, we'll say Michael is our power user, and we want to create a role for him. We can simply grab his ID that's highlighted there, drag it off to the right, and drop it on the create new role, and it'll create that role virtually for us. Then we can drag that role and assign it to a user, and we can start seeing what that impact is to the user. Okay, so if we were to create a role for Michael and then drag it on his ID, you'll see over here that on the far right that Michael has used 25 transactions. He's still unauthorized for 22, and he's got a 12% coverage. Now, the difference that you're seeing here right now for those 3 transactions or those 3 objects are reports. All right, so reports are a little bit different, and they're handled when they come in. They're considered to be already authorized. That's why you're seeing that Michael doesn't have anything assigned to him yet, but he's already got some coverage, and that's why that is. Okay, and so that's the initial designer screen. We also have, and this is where you'll see we drag from right to left, and then and that's how we create the roles. We can apply a functional template, which we talked about as well. So we can right click on a role after we create it, and we can apply a functional template. And this is a list of kind of our functional templates that we have available. You simply click on it, and it'll apply the T codes based on that list to your virtual role. We have reports in the designer as well, okay? And so now you can start doing some things with actual data mining in the roles, right? So we can look at the list user status. So we can look at all of our users and see what their transactions are, what roles do they have assigned? Then we can start doing some of these other reports. We can analyze better fitting role assignments. So maybe we've gone through and we've created a whole bunch of roles, and there's a better role out there that we can assign Michael or whoever that will give them better coverage with less surplus transactions or less surplus objects. We can also use reports at the role level, right? So we can look at optimize the roles by parameter T codes. Maybe we want to see all the parameter T codes that are out there, okay? We can list all the roles with menu objects. We can carve out T codes into smaller roles. So maybe we have a set of T codes that we put in a role. We want to carve those out into a smaller role. Maybe your display only stuff we want to get into a smaller role, okay? We have the ability to bring into the project multiple types of objects. So we can bring in transactions, we can bring in function modules, we can bring in a host of other things, web services, web-in pro access, that kind of stuff. Even we can go out and look at who's been hitting certain business tables and bring that access in as well. And you'll see that down where it says business data reports. That's what that area is for. I also have reports around this transaction, so we can make transactions not usable in the project. So maybe people have been using a custom transaction that you want to get rid of. We can lock that transaction inside the project so it can't be assigned to any roles, can't be assigned to any users, okay? So once we've done all of this and we've got our roles where we want them, we now sit down with the business and we talk to the business and say, this is what, based on usage, this is what we think the roles should look like. And then you have that final conversation with the business, right? So we're not sitting in the room for 3 days with them trying to figure it out. The business is out doing their work, and we only have to sit down there with them for a few hours to finalize the roles before we push them to the profile generator. Pushing them to the profile generator is a simple push of a button. We would simply go to under the role report, there's a list role status. We could generate and push to the profile generator with the push of a button, and it'll create all of the roles in the profile generator. What that means is it's going to go and take all of the objects that we've assigned to these roles, these virtual roles, and put them in your menu of the role. It will not go through and do the authorization stuff for you. You still have to manually go through and verify the authorization data, but it'll actually build the roles for you based on what you've put in the role so far. Again, SU24, highly needed, right? So the better your SU24s are, the better your end roles are going to be, the less work you're going to have to do. If you have fully authorized and complete SU24s, it should knock out 85% of the work you have to do to the role after you push it. Okay, so the next step is we're going to, in parallel to this, right, and to parallel to this step is we're now going to also go out and look at your custom development, right? Because SU24 is not just transactions, right? It's custom programs behind it. Okay, so we got to do that in parallel, or you're going to be fighting you're going to fight this problem constantly during the go live if you don't get your custom development stuff scanned as well. All right, so this module we're going to use here is the ABAP Alchemist. It's to optimize your ABAP code, detect vulnerabilities. It's got an API finder, and the most important part of this for me is optimizing the SU24 in the way of a role redesign. I really need that part done up front. Okay. So analysis and evaluation of the development objects regarding a security incident. Again, that's part of where we differ from code scanning. Our code scanner has kind of a security slant to it. It's really looking at the security side of your code. If we have missing authority objects or authority checks in the system, we'll call those out for you. We'll identify incorrect security checks, right? So if your authority checks are not coded correctly, we'll call that out as well. We'll optimize the authority checks based on recommendations. So if there's authority checks where they really don't need to be, we'll let you know. And then easy comparison of and transfer of the missing SU24 proposals, right? So it's a one click. We can tell you that this role has a lot of security objects in it, and you can actually go and transfer that out to the transaction. If there's a transaction involved with it, you can transfer those objects over. One of the things that this report is very good at, and I've used several times already at other clients, is when you get the emergency, oh, the developers built a custom program for us, and now we're getting authority check errors because we didn't tell you about it up front, right? Everybody gets those calls, and it's an emergency, hurry up, and usually the idea is you go to QA, do an STO on trace, and you start grabbing all the objects and values, and it's a long, tedious process. With ours, you can jumpstart that whole process by running the scan on the program and getting all the authority checks out of the way up front. You know what objects are required because you've scanned it, and we tell you what the authority checks are that are coded into the system. From there, it's an easy thing to update your SU24s, update your roles, and get it into production in a clean manner. Okay. It also has a developer slant to it. We have an API finder. So we deliver out of the box, we deliver some of the APIs, the more common APIs around security, like user exit checks, those kind of things, updates to tables. So your developers don't have to figure out how to do that. They don't have to code it themselves. They can simply call it up on our API finder, copy and paste it into their programs. One of the cool things about the API finder is they can also add their own coded checks in there as well. So if your developers have built their own code and they have a module that they really like, they can put it in there and it becomes a repository for your developers to use. So they're not rebuilding code, and the code isn't different every time they're trying to do the same thing. And then we can ensure standard compliance, sustainability, authorization management. So your normal, in the previous webinar, I talked about inserting yourself into the development process and how important that is. This is a way to do that. All right, so this is what an ad hoc scan would look like. You'll see that we have patterns on the left where we talk about what it is we want to look for, all right? Authority check statements, debugging, critical ABAP keywords, switchable authorization checks, those kind of things. We can flag those. At the top, you tell it what object type you want. You'll see on the right, we have a whole host of things that we can scan. We can scan roles. I can scan programs, transactions, function modules, function groups. So I just tell it what I want to scan, tell it what I want to scan it for, and at the very bottom you get something else that is kind of unique to our programming scan that you don't get in most other scanners. We have the ability to jump out multiple levels in the call stack. So if your program calls another transaction, or if your program has an include, we can tell you how far down in the call stack we want to search. Typically 5 will get you about 98% of all of the authority checks kind of things. But if you happen to know that you're still missing something, you can go a little bit deeper, right? So we can go the full length of the code, including all of the includes and call transactions. When you get your findings back, you'll see that we have a report. Obviously, we have several reports. The first one is the basic findings, authority checks, keywords. You'll see the authority check statements, those kind of things, and we'll give you information about that and what the message is. Why are we flagging this as a warning or an error or an informational type issue, right? For us as security administrators, the two that we're mainly interested in is the authority check one, and then the authority checks including SU24. All right, the authority check one will look just like this, only it won't have the objects at the end for SU24. What this will do is it will go out and it will start looking at the object type, and it will tell you what the object that's being called in the value and field that's required and whether or not it's in your SU24 values. Right? It'll tell you the green check means that the object there and the value, the field is there and the value is correct. The one below it is telling you that the object there, the field is there, but now we have an alarm, which basically tells us that the value that's in there is either wrong, it's either incorrect for what the code is looking for, or it's not maintained at all. Okay, you can simply update that by hitting the update arrow on the right, or you can double click on the SU24 wand and it'll jump you out to SU24 where you can evaluate the SU24 value on its own merit and make the changes as you feel. All right, once we've done that, right, so we've developed our roles and we've pushed them, we've met with the business, we've pushed them to the profile generator, and in parallel to that, we've done our SU24 optimizations on our custom codes. Now we need to start accounting for the organizational levels. So this is where we're going to start accounting for our basically our derived role concept, if that's what you use. In our system, we simplify the org field maintenance. We use something we call replicated roles. And that is basically with org sets and org values. It's different than the derived role concept from SAP. So you'll get, with our system, you get all of the benefits of a derived role concept without any of the hassles, okay? We also have your mass replication tools, your mass create tools, those kind of things. We can automatically distribute org field changes, and we can maintain the role quality. So I can visually see all of my org values and if they're in sync with my org fields on my roles when I use this tool. Okay, so these are some of the challenges. You're used to them already if you're an administrator. Technical management, it's inefficient using profile generator because you're going from role to role. Mass changes from an org level standpoint, that's always a big driver for huge projects and maintenance nightmares. Incorrect specifications at the org that's not very flexible. Right, and so if you get it wrong, your ranges are wrong, you end up getting in compliance issues, your audit issues later on in life. All right, so building organizational sets. So I'm going to show you a little graphic about this in just a second. So we can import existing structures from the SAP system. So if you have EC01 set up, I can bring those in. If you already have your whole environment set up, we can import that in and create directly from there your org structures. Okay, copy of roles specific to organizational levels in one step. Okay, so we can apply these org values to each role in a template role area with the push of a button, and you get a visual look at what roles are where. And I'll explain that a little bit better here in a second. All right. So we build things based on what we call org sets. At the bottom are our org values, typical values that you're used to seeing in an org value in a profile generator scenario. So plant, division, company code, those kind of things, all of the org value information. Typically in profile generator, we'd go through and we'd manually insert these values. With our tool, what we're going to do is we're going to create org sets. So for example, here we have an org set for Germany and an org set for Switzerland. Right, with a plant and division for each one. Okay, And then that's just under the top part is just the tool, right? So it's the root, and then we have these org sets, and then those org sets now contain the org values that we need, that we are going to want to apply to roles. So the way this works is that we'll create our org set. And so the exciting one would maybe be an org set group where it has both the German and the Switzerland org set with it, and we can apply that to a role. And now all of those values are applied to that role for us behind the scenes, right? So we're doing it with an org set. And so I can simply relate every org set or org set group to a role, and those values get applied. So when we go around later and we have to make a mass change, I don't have to go role by role and make the changes. I can update the org set or the org set group and then go through and click a button and synchronize now all of my roles in mass. All right, so one of the other benefits of our system when it comes to role replication and where it goes away from the derived role concept is our roles are all single roles. They are not linked together with inheritance like you have in AGR define, table AGR define in SAP. Our roles are all single roles, which means they can be moved by themselves, right? You can move that role on its own. You can have a role that is different from the parent role, right? So some of those things you can apply these to single roles. You don't have to have a complete derived role concept to do this. You can use our org values to apply them to single roles and move those forward into the system. Or you could do 100, you could do 1,000 roles, all the same way, just like you would in a derived role concept, right? We can apply these templates there and the maintenance becomes much easier. Okay, and we're really losing time, so I got to move forward quick. All right, so the next step after we've done our org set replication is we now need to test the roles. I now need to know and make sure that the roles that we've built and the authorization values that we've given them will work for our users. To do that, we're going to go to productive test simulation. All right, productive test simulation is basically two modules. It's the exciting times and the role builder module. Again, think of the exciting times as the administrator console. This is where we're going to define our reference users, our dialogue users, and our test scenarios. The role builder is where we're going to go and do basically the analysis of those tests. We have the ability to do some automated role creation, but we really only use that for RFC users and batch users, simply because it could create a mess in your system if you expand it to multiple users or hundreds of users at a single time. All right, so the way this works, and so these are just some of the challenges. It's creation of granular, right? So it's security's tough, right? It's complex. Missing authorizations are hard to identify, right? So when you do your normal testing, typically your script testing, folks just go through and make sure they can do the transactions. Very rarely do they do the negative testing. We're going to get both of those with our system when we do this. The processing time, right? The iterations it takes to test, fix errors, and go back and test again is long, right? Our system, we're going to reduce that time by at least half, guaranteed at least half, probably more, especially on the end user business side. Those users don't even know that they're doing anything in the way of testing, okay? All right, so we're going to test in parallel to the daily business without process interruption. So our users are going to just test normal day to day. We're going to mimic those security checks in the background against our new roles. Faster processing times, right? So because our business users don't have to come into a test environment and go through that iteration process, they save time, we save time because our security remediation can happen at our leisure, if you will, and we can do all of the maintenance that we have found at one time. I don't have to do it one at a time as the guy gets an error and I go fix it, and then I get another and I go fix it. I can get a list of all of the issues with the role up front, and I can go fix those at one time, okay? And so easy and clear, so we make the data very easy to understand. You'll see it in a second. And direct SU24 maintenance. Again, we can now do this with the logs and we can compare that to your SU24 values. And I can go make updates to, again, hardening and optimizing that SU24. It's a constant thing we need to do. All right, and then we can consideration of compliance standards through blacklists and whitelists. So if you have transactions that we don't want users to have or that they need special approval, we're gonna flag those for you as well. So the way this works, We're going to have a reference user. We're going to give our reference user the new roles, and we're going to map that reference user to a dialog user, right? It's pretty straightforward. The next slide is the important one. All right, so when we turn on a test, all right, so say that our dialog user is going to be an accountant, all right, he's in the accountant job, and we've created a role for the accountant. We're going to create a user, a reference user, that has the accountant access that we've built. Our new roles are on there. Okay, when we turn this test on and our dialog user logs in, what happens is the reference user automatically gets assigned to the dialog user, and a collector job runs in the background. The important thing for this to know is that every authority check happens against the dialog user. So if they come in and they hit FB01, right, that authority check statement that takes place to see if that user is authorized, it happens first against our new role. All right, the kernel is going to direct the authority check statement first at our reference user and thereby test our new role. If it passes, fine. Nothing to log. We know our new role has the authority that our dialog user is going to require in the future. If it fails against the reference user, we're going to throw that into a log, okay? And then we're going to go, the kernel is going to go over and it's going to test the access again, only now it's going to test it against the dialog user, okay? So we failed against the reference user. Our new role is obviously missing something that the end user is trying to do. It goes over and it now tests the dialog user. Is this something the dialog user already has? Is it something that they're already doing and they should be authorized to do? If so, we're going to get a return code 0 and we're going to paste that into the log, right? And so our reference user has now been tested. We had a failure. We have logged the issue. So we've logged the context. So what transaction were they running? I know the authorization object, the field, and the value that was tested. All of that is in my log. Okay, and I also know that the user passed on the dialog test. Okay, so all that is now in my log. The benefit to this now is the dialog user never got an authority error. They never failed the authority check. They're still doing their day-to-day work, moseying along, and they're productive. They're 100% productive. Okay, so if it goes through again and he runs another transaction, let's say it fails against our reference user and it fails against the dialog user, so it failed on both users, we're also going to capture that and flag it, only we're going to get a different return code. And that return code will tell us if the object is missing, if the value for the object is wrong or missing, or if it's not there at all, right? So it's going to tell us all of that, and we'll know that up front. Our report that we get back will look something like this. Okay, so let's focus on the first line. The green highlight on the first line means that this is a transaction or an authorization that is in our whitelist. It's just a table that comes pre-delivered with a certain amount of information just from our history, but you can also update it with your own values as well. What that basically tells us is that this authorization is considered something that we don't care if anybody gets it. Right? It's something that if we have Delta roles turned on and we're doing some automatic creation for an RFC user or a batch user, it could automatically add it, and that's what you see in the first column. That's the add column. Okay, but you'll see that we now get the user. So this is our dialog user. The date and time stamp is when this happened. The context of when or what this was doing. So if it was a transaction or an RFC or if it was a program, we'll know what it was that it was doing that. We can see the role that was being called. What role did it get tested against? Right? We can see the source code. We get the return code. Where did this fail? A 0 tells us that it failed against our new user, our new role, but passed against the dialog user. So this is something that we really want to spend time focusing on, is the zeros. Okay? We'll get the object, the field, and the values that were tested. Okay, and so now we can go back as security administrators and do our remediation and evaluation. All right, role quality and monitoring. So once we've done PTS, the protected go live is the same thing. We just switch where the authorizations are at. Excuse me. We switch the new roles for the old roles and the old roles for the new roles. Okay, so now we've gone live. Everything's cruising along. We need to make sure our roles stay compliant. All right, so we're going to improve our role quality. We'll detect critical access. Again, we're going to optimize your SU24, and we can help with S4 HANA compatibility. Really, what the role profilers is just a set of about 95 reports that you can run on a regular basis to go and monitor your system. The first set being role quality and sustainability, in my opinion, are the most important reports that you can run for your role redesign, right? Manual authorizations, open authorizations, authorizations that are in a change status. So somebody has maintained the standard from SU24 and now that inheritance with SU24 is broken, right? So those are all things you need to know. You can do a simulation of your read old, merge new. If you want to see just how bad your roles are with the SU24, you can go and look at that, right? And so we have a whole list of reports that will provide this information, okay? All of our reports have drill down. So this first one shows us this role has 99 open fields. If you double click on it, you'll actually see the role and the object in the field that has the open values. Okay, so there's drill down capabilities in all of them. One of the areas that we have now, you'll see we were talking about user classifications and the user licensing. You'll see here that we now have menu objects. So we can, our first step, these are designed to run from top to bottom. So you'd go through and do the menu object class, clean up the menu objects, right? So what objects equal what license types? Then we would do the role classification. It's going to use what you do in the menu classification to help you with the role classification. So now you can go and use that to help assign your role classifications. What role equals what license type? Now we can take that information and you could look at the user classifications. We can now look at all three and compare those, and we can transfer based on this data with this transfer button on the right and the blue arrow. We can transfer that over to your users automatically. We can transfer that license type. At the top, you'll see a user licensing summary. You can use that to click on that button, and what it'll do is it'll bring up a summary. So it'll base how many users are in what license type and show you how that applies towards your currently purchased licenses, right? So you'll get a summary of what your current license values are based on what you've purchased and if you have over or under. So if you're using more professional users than you bought, that's an information thing that you need to know because that's money out the door. All right. And so S4 HANA migration, we can help you with that. So we can give it a list of roles and we can do an evaluation of your roles, menu objects, based on the simplification list that SAP provides for S4 HANA, right? So in this first case, you'll see that we have 4 obsolete transactions and 1 new transaction being introduced. What we can do here is if you double click on it, you'll get again, the detail information below. You'll see that FDO 1, 2, 3, and 5 are being replaced with transaction BP. If you want to adjust your role, so if you want to take away the FD 0, 1, 2, and 3 out of your role menu and replace it with the BP, just click on the adjust button and it'll do it for you automatically in the system, right? It's going to actually go out to your role and it's going to modify the menu with this new information. A lot of our customers are just adding the new transactions. They're not replacing the old, taking the old ones out. Simply because, especially in the area of BP, there's some of these transactions that SAP has said you don't need anymore, when in fact you still do. All right, so you can append the new objects to the role just as easy, and then you can go do your role maintenance. Okay, so we have this ability in the role profiler, but we also have it in the role designer. So you can do this and make a project out of it in role designer and do your complete migration from there. Again, SU24, we have a whole list of reports that are around nothing but doing and analyzing your roles and helping you update SU24. Okay, again, you'll see this is a constant theme with us. All right, so concept generation. So that's an ongoing process. We're going to do the role monitoring on an ongoing basis, day to day, to keep our stuff clean. But we have to prove to audit that we're maintaining our security concept, that we're in compliance with this, with the security concept we defined, and with the values and the concepts that the audit has pushed down to us. Can you have developer keys in production? Most companies, that's a no, right? So you have to define that and you have to show that you're in compliance. Typically, that is a long, drawn-out process. Typically happens mid-audit cycle. About halfway through your audit cycle, you have to do a mid-audit cycle review, and then you get ready for your audit, whenever that is. But if I can show you a way to do it on a month-to-month basis, and then you can hand the report to your auditors, and it's all automated, that saves a huge amount of time and headache on your side. Okay, so we can create revision compliant SAP security concepts, right? Assurance of the validity, actual concepts, right? Again, so defining and validating that your concept and you're in compliance with it. Definition of security requirements, right? sometimes need to know because you're opening up the doors, you're defining the holes in your system, right? Where are the holes? What are we doing to secure them, right? If a hacker gets hold of that, that can be important information. Then you have to consider compliance and regulatory standards. Security environments is time consuming, right? And your internal control system. And then you have to be able to reproduce your approach, right? So if you validate it one way today, you need to be able to reproduce that over and over. With the security architect, we deliver best practice templates, right? So this was developed by E&Y with us in E&Y in Europe. So it's done by an auditing company as well. We can output as PDF or HTML documents. Flexible to adjustment requirements, right? So as the company changes, you can make changes to one template and push that out. Okay. We can even import your own designs. We can import your own sheets, your own style sheets, front pages, company logos, all of that can be brought in so you can really make the document your own. And then we can test that concept against other systems from, like if you have Solution Manager, any connected system, I can do it right from Solution Manager. I can go out and build this concept and test it remotely from Solution Manager. I don't have to be in every system to do this. Okay, so when you start it up, this is what it's going to look. You're going to look at available templates. So our available templates down the top, and you just simply turn on the ones that you want to use with the check mark. So, a check mark means I want to use that in my concept. If you don't want to use it, turn it off. You also have the ability to upload your own concepts here at this point. For instance, most people have a naming convention. If you want to simply input your own naming convention, you can upload it and it'll show up down here in the bottom part. All right, all of these are editable. You can just right click inside the authorization side here. It's HTML. You can go in and edit these documents all you want, make them your own. All right, so as we turn things on and off, our use selection down here will show those selections in our chapter. This is what's actually going to be used when we generate our concept. Okay, and so now you'll see the use selections we have based on what we've selected. We have different checks that we can do in the system, and you can define your own checks. So if you have custom tables and stuff you want to check against, you can do that as well. Okay, what are we doing on time? Woo, 8 minutes, gotta go. All right, so we're going to select the the different checks that we want to do, and then we can go and we can actually run a check against the system. All right. If we have other systems, you'll see that our other systems will be down here. We can check it against multiple systems at one time, and we can compare results against those systems. And this is what the report will come back and look like, right? So you'll get under the group system security, you'll see the developer access, right? In the DEM system, apparently we have some issues. We've got some users with developer access, and you'll get a list of all of the different types of checks and what the values are in a common red light, green light scenario. Drill down on the red light, green light will show you the actual values, right, that were tested, what the current and what the expected it should be, right? So we define what we expect it to be, and then it tests it against what's actually in the system, and that's what determines your red light and green light. Okay. Questions and answers. I think we've got 6 minutes. Michael, are there any questions in the?
Yes, I have a few. I tried to answer a few already, and there are a few more. One is, let's see, related to role naming conventions.
Yep.
Are there any restrictions on how we can name roles?
Nope. No.
Okay.
In fact, what we can do is in the system, I can define your naming convention in the role profiler. So our reports, I can actually, one of the reports we have is a test against the naming convention. So we can define your naming convention in the system and test all of your roles against that naming convention.
Okay.
And you can do that in the profiler and the designer. So before you actually create your role, you can test your roles and make sure that they're compliant with their naming standard.
Okay. And then the next one was related to SU24, the merge. The specific question is, will there be a role freeze on old roles whilst SU24 modifications are being carried out to avoid issues in life after old roles transported?
No, unfortunately, I understand your pain. And that just means that you understand SU24 because it's a concept that goes by a lot of people. Yes, if we maintain an SU24 value, it will maintain it for all the roles in the system. So basically, if I change that value, the next time you go to a current role, a role that is currently being used, and you do an edit old, merge, or read old, merge new, it will bring those new values into your old roles. It won't impact just the new ones. So you're actually updating your SU24. But we tell you up front. We'll tell you up front what roles would be impacted. So we'll give you, if we make a change and you run that SU24, one of the values that you'll get is the number of roles that would be impacted. Double click on it and it'll drill down into it and it'll give you a list of all the roles that you need to go look at.
And is that a limitation in the XAMS or a limitation or just the way how SAP works?
That's just how SAP works.
Okay, so if you were to do it manually and manual SU24 update, it would be the same?
Yep, you'd still have the same problem.
Okay.
And it's the same issue you face when you do SU25, right? So one of the steps you go through when you do an SU25 update is you have to go out and see the impacted roles with new transactions, those kind of things. So that's an SAP requirement. It's nothing we do.
Okay. And then another question was around replicated roles, how the business can ensure that there is no drift in roles at the object level. Does that make sense to you?
No drift in roles at the object level. No, I'll take a stab at what I think you're saying. I think you're trying to say is how do we not overextend the access? And essentially when you create your org sets and your org set groups, the business would have to be involved before we applied those values. They would have to verify that the values that we're getting ready to apply to our roles are actually correct. And it's a much easier process to do than it is when you do it at the profile generator level, because now you're not doing it role by role by role. You just have them look at the org sets, and then what you're going to do is tell them what you're mapping those org sets to, which roles. So it's a much easier process. And I think that's what, if not, pop in a question in the thing and we'll try and be a little clearer, or give us a call.
Okay. And then the other question regarding productive test simulation. So does that replace unit testing, augment unit testing?
It can. It can. It depends on your company. And typically when you bring this up that you're going to try and do simulations in production, your audit team will jump on desks and scream at you. And you have to do a lot of explaining. I have yet to have a company not go through with PTS. I have had a couple of companies that require us to do it on the QA system first, or on your acceptance environment first, and then we can do PTS in production. But it's really dependent on your company. I would say yes, it can replace almost all of your unit testing and your user acceptance testing. But again, it's dependent on your company and its standards and what you're comfortable and what you can convince them that you're able to do.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then I guess a related follow-up question, if doing the testing in production, does this not mean that single roles are not being tested? So do you test individual isolated roles?
Yeah, it'll depend on your concept. I prefer, based on our previous webinar, I prefer job roles. And if that job role is 4 roles, I'll put all 4 of those roles on my reference user and test them all at once. Because if something comes back out, if I get an authorization error that I need to now go fix, I'm a security administrator. I should know which one of those 4 job roles I need to fix. You can certainly do it by single roles if you want. You can even do it by composite role. I have clients that use composite roles and they do it. The role design is yours. So if we get an authorization in the log, as you're the security administrator, you should know where on that role concept you need to insert that new authorization. Okay. So you can test it the job role, or you can test single or multiple, however many roles you want to test, you could do it at one time.
Okay. Another question was regarding with replicated roles, how to keep them in sync. And I guess the answer is the role replicator keeps them in sync. Yep. To give you an overview of if you're out of sync, right? Yeah,
one of the screenshots that is not in this presentation that I'm wishing I'd have put in is we have a separate screen that you go to, and what you'll see is all of your replicated roles, and you'll see their statuses. So if they're out of sync, it'll give you a warning. It'll give you a red light, and you can double click on a button and do a compare between that role's values and the template role and the org set that you're trying to apply. And if you want to fix that, you can just double click on a button and it'll push that change out and resync that role so it's back to standard.
Okay, and then last question before we wrap it up. For creating new roles, is SC24 going to be used only for custom transactions or even for standard SAP transactions?
You should use it for everything, custom and standard. So if you have custom stuff that you're not maintaining, custom transactions that you're not maintaining in SU24, you should be. You need to be putting them in there and maintaining them there as well. So it'll use it for everything.
Okay, very good. And now we're at 2 p.m. Eastern sharp. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining and spending an hour with us. Again, the recording is going to be sent out via email within the next 24 hours. We'll try to answer any remaining questions that we couldn't get to and send them out via email as well. And if you have any questions or concerns, just feel free to reach out to us offline. We can, walk you through a separate demo, whatever the case may be, to get all your questions answered. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Jeff.